The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor the same night my marriage did. Before I tell you how one slap at a wedding exposed everything I'd been hiding and how my husband's silence destroyed us, let me be clear, the loudest revenge isn't shouted, it's planned, patient, and final. The night I walked out of that ballroom with my cheeks still burning, heels clicking against polished floors while 200 guests watched in stunned silence, was the night everything changed. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea they'd just armed me. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I'm 36 years old. That night at the Whitmore Harrison wedding reception, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Forsyth Hotel in Savannah, Georgia, watching crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the marble floors. The October air was thick with magnolia and expensive perfume, and I'd spent 40 minutes listening to my father-in-law, Charles Whitmore, regale his circle with stories about his latest real estate conquest, a historic district he'd bought and would soon transform into luxury condos. I wore a modest navy dress that Daniel had approved of that morning. "Perfect," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "You know how Mother feels about anyone outshining the bride." I'd smiled then, pushing down the familiar sting. After 3 years of marriage, I'd learned my place in the Whitmore hierarchy, present but invisible, acknowledged but never celebrated. The moment that changed everything started innocently enough. Charles's business partner, Gregory Hammond, had been drinking bourbon since cocktail hour, and his voice carried across our corner of the ballroom. "You know, Charles, I still can't believe your Daniel married so, practically. I mean, after Victoria Ashford. We all thought—" "Water under the bridge," Charles interrupted, his gray eyes finding mine. "Rachel here keeps him grounded. Don't you? Dear, someone has to remember where the grocery store is." The group laughed, that specific kind of country club laughter that cuts without seeming cruel. I'd endured worse, but tonight, maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was watching the bride's family treat their daughter-in-law like royalty while I stood there like hired help. Something in me finally spoke up. "Actually, Charles, I think Daniel appreciates having a wife who built her own success rather than inherited it." My voice was steady, calm. "Though I understand that might be a foreign concept at this table." The laughter died. Charles's face went from pink to red to purple in the span of 3 seconds. The bourbon on his breath hit me before his hand did. The slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. My cheek exploded with heat, and I heard someone gasp, maybe the bride's mother, maybe one of the servers. The string quartet stopped mid-waltz. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward us. I stood there, my hand rising instinctively to my burning cheek, watching Charles's chest heave with the effort of his rage. His wedding ring had caught my cheekbone, and I felt something warm and wet blood. Probably. "You ungrateful little—" Charles started, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at Daniel, my husband, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, and for one moment, one brief, shining moment, I thought he would defend me. I thought he would cross that space, put himself between his father and me, and finally choose his wife. Instead, he walked over slowly, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor. He touched my elbow gently, leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, the one I'd bought him for Christmas, and whispered, "Just let it go, Rachel. Not here, not tonight. Just let it go." The words hit harder than his father's hand had. I looked into Daniel's eyes, searching for something, anger at his father, concern for me, anything that suggested he understood what had just happened, but all I saw was embarrassment, not for what his father had done, but for the scene I'd caused by speaking up. I pulled my arm away from his touch, straightened my shoulders, and looked around the ballroom. Elaine Whitmore, my mother-in-law, stood by the chocolate fountain, her expression one of mild inconvenience. as if I'd spilled wine on the tablecloth. The other guests watched with a mixture of shock and that particular brand of Southern politeness that demands pretending nothing happened. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clear across the silent ballroom. I picked up my clutch from the table, noting how my hands didn't shake not yet. Anyway, that would come later. I walked through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea, my heels clicking against marble in perfect rhythm. Someone started whispering, then another. By the time I reached the ballroom doors, the whispers had become a roar of speculation behind me. The last thing I heard before the doors closed was Charles's voice, loud and dismissive. "Well, that's what happens when you marry outside your class." And Daniel said nothing. Nothing at all. 3 years earlier, I met Daniel Whitmore at a tech conference in Atlanta. I was presenting my latest software development for supply chain optimization, and he was there scouting investment opportunities for his family's portfolio. He found me after my presentation, holding 2 glasses of wine, that famous Whitmore smile lighting up his face. "That was brilliant," he said, handing me a glass. I understood maybe 60% of it, but the 40% that got through was incredible. He was charming in that effortless way that comes from never having to try too hard for anything. Tall, with sandy hair and his mother's green eyes, Daniel carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in a world where doors opened before he reached them. But that night, he seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking questions about algorithms and implementation strategies until the conference center staff practically pushed us out at 11:30 p.m. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Daniel pursued me with an intensity that felt like being chosen for something special. Dinner at restaurants I'd only read about in magazines. Weekend trips to Charleston, where his family had a house on the Battery. He'd introduce me as the genius who's revolutionizing logistics, and beam with pride when his friends looked impressed. I fell in love with him on a rainy Tuesday in my cramped apartment in Cleveland. He'd flown in unexpectedly, showing up at my door soaking wet because he'd forgotten an umbrella. "I had a terrible day," he said, "and I realized the only person I wanted to talk to about it was you." That night, sitting on my second-hand couch eating Chinese takeout from paper containers, he wasn't a Whitmore. He was just Daniel, vulnerable and real. The first time I met his parents should have been my warning. We drove up to their estate in Savannah, 20 acres of manicured perfection with a house that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. Elaine Whitmore opened the door wearing pearls at 2 in the afternoon, her smile practiced and cold. "So you're Rachel," she said, looking me up and down like she was cataloging my deficiencies. "Daniel's mentioned you. You work with computers." "I develop software systems," I corrected gently. "How modern," she replied, in a tone that suggested modern was synonymous with unfortunate. Charles Whitmore barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal when we entered his study. "Cleveland," he said, as if the word itself was distasteful. "Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Right. And what does your father do?" "He passed away when I was 15, I said. "He was a high school math teacher." "Ah," Charles said, returning to his paper. "Well, we all start somewhere." Daniel squeezed my hand. "Give them time," he whispered later that night. "They're just protective. They'll love you once they know you." But they never tried to know me. At every family gathering, I was introduced as Daniel's girlfriend and later Daniel's wife, never as Rachel. When I mentioned my master's degree from MIT, Elaine would change the subject to her charity work. When I tried to contribute to conversations about business, Charles would pat my hand condescendingly and say, "That's sweet, dear, but this is a bit complex." The small humiliations accumulated like compound interest. At the engagement party, Elaine seated me at the edge of the family table, claiming she thought I'd be more comfortable there. When we discussed wedding plans, she'd already chosen everything: venue, flowers, even my dress designer before asking my opinion. "I knew you'd be too busy with your little computer job to handle these details," she explained. "It's not a little job," I said quietly. I run my own consulting firm. Of course you do, sweetheart, she replied, already walking away. Daniel always had excuses. They're from a different generation. They don't mean anything by it. They're just set in their ways. He'd kiss my forehead and promise things would get better after the wedding, after we gave them grandchildren, after his father retired and mellowed out. I believed him because I loved him, because when it was just the two of us, he made me feel like I was enough. He'd trace my face with his fingers and tell me I was the smartest woman he'd ever met. He'd bring me coffee exactly how I liked it every morning. He'd listen to me explain my latest project with genuine fascination. But I started noticing things. How he never corrected his parents when they minimized my achievements. How he'd laugh nervously when his country club friends made jokes about me being his charity case. How he'd suggest I dress more conservatively, speak more softly, be more like the other wives. "I'm not trying to change you," he said once. "I'm just trying to help you fit in." I should have left then, but I thought love meant compromise. I thought if I tried hard enough, proved myself enough, eventually I'd earn their respect. My father, before he died, had told me, "Rachel, never let anyone make you feel small." But there I was, shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. The engagement party at the Whitmore estate was when I truly understood my place in their world. It was a perfect southern evening in May, the kind where the air smells like Confederate jasmine and old money. 200 guests mingled on the lawn, and I spent most of the night being mistaken for the event planner. "Could you check on the canapes?" one of Elaine's friends asked me, pressing a champagne flute into my hand to hold while she adjusted her wrap. When I explained I was the bride-to-be, she laughed like I'd made a delightful joke. Elaine introduced me to her circle with surgical precision. "This is Rachel. She's in technology, I think. Something with computers." The pause before technology stretched just long enough to telegraph her disdain. The women would smile, ask where I went to school, and when I said MIT, they'd respond, "How nice," in the same tone you'd use for a child showing you a finger painting. During dinner, the conversation turned to real estate and stock portfolios. Charles held court at the head of the table, discussing his latest acquisition, a historic property he'd bought for pennies on the dollar from a family forced into foreclosure. "Business is business," he said, raising his glass. "Sentiment doesn't pay dividends." "Seems cruel," I said quietly, profiting from someone's misfortune. The table went silent. Charles's fork paused midway to his mouth. "That's a rather simplistic view, dear. Though I suppose in your field, you don't deal with real assets." "Code is an asset," I replied. "In fact, intellectual property often holds more value than—" "Rachel works very hard," Daniel interrupted, his hand covering mine. A warning. She doesn't always understand how these things work in our world. Our world, not mine. Never mine. Later, I overheard Elaine with her sister in the kitchen. "She's perfectly adequate," Elaine was saying. "Not what we'd hoped for, naturally, but Daniel seems determined. At least she's not after the money the poor thing probably doesn't even understand how much there is." I stood frozen in the hallway, holding the glass of water I'd come to get. Adequate. Like I was a passing grade. Barely acceptable. But it was the assumption about the money that made me smile grimly. They had no idea. 6 months before meeting Daniel, I'd sold my first patent to a major logistics company. The software I'd developed could reduce supply chain costs by 30%. The sale price, $68 million. I'd told no one except my lawyer and accountant. The money sat in various investments, growing quietly while I continued working because I loved what I did. Not because I needed to. I never told Daniel. At first, it was because I wanted to be sure he loved me for myself. Then, as his family's condescension grew, it became my secret armor. Every time Charles bragged about his wealth, every time Elaine made snide comments about my little apartment in Cleveland, I thought about those numbers in my portfolio and smiled. The bridal shower was perhaps the worst humiliation. Elaine hosted it at her country club, and I'd spent weeks choosing the perfect gift for Daniel's cousin, the next bride in the family. I'd found a first edition of her favorite author's poetry collection, beautifully bound and personally inscribed. When she opened it, there was a moment of confused silence. "Oh," she said, "a used book. How thoughtful." The room tittered with barely suppressed laughter. Elaine swooped in. "Rachel believes in recycling. Very environmental of her." More laughter. I sat there, burning with embarrassment, while they opened the other gifts: Hermes scarves, Cartier bracelets, things that screamed wealth rather than whispered thoughtfulness. My gift was quietly moved to the side, forgotten. But I remembered everything, every slight, every dismissive laugh, every time they made me feel like an interloper in my own marriage. I started writing them down in a journal I kept locked in my office, not out of self-pity, but as data. My father had taught me that patterns reveal truth, and the pattern here was crystal clear. I would never be good enough for them. Daniel remained oblivious, or perhaps he chose to be. "You're being too sensitive," he'd say when I tried to explain how his mother's comments hurt. "That's just how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it." But I knew better. Elaine Whitmore meant every perfectly placed barb, every casual dismissal. She was protecting her kingdom from an outsider who didn't belong. And Charles. He simply didn't consider me worth the effort of direct cruelty. I was beneath notice, like the staff or the furniture present, but irrelevant. I started preparing then, though I didn't fully realize it. Opening new accounts they didn't know about, researching the Whitmore business holdings, learning about their debts, their leverage, their vulnerabilities. It was just information gathering, I told myself, just understanding the battlefield I'd somehow found myself on. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Never show all your cards until the table is full, Rachel. And when you do, make sure you're holding aces." I was holding more than aces. I was holding their entire house of cards, and they didn't even know I was playing. The wedding planning began in earnest 3 months before the disaster at the Forsyth Hotel. I offered to contribute to the costs one afternoon while Elaine reviewed vendor contracts in her sunroom. The words had barely left my mouth when she started laughing, not a polite chuckle, but genuine, tears in her eyes laughter. "Sweetheart," she said, catching her breath, "this is a Whitmore wedding. The flowers alone cost more than... well, you couldn't possibly understand. We're talking about a $250,000 event, but it's sweet of you to offer your little savings." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. My little savings could have bought 10 such weddings without making a dent in my portfolio. "I just wanted to contribute something meaningful," I said quietly. "Oh, but you are." Elaine patted my hand condescendingly. "You're giving us Daniel's happiness. That's contribution enough." The bridal shower 2 weeks later was hosted at the country club's garden pavilion. I'd spent days selecting gifts for the bridesmaids, delicate silver bracelets with their initials engraved, each one personally chosen. When it came time to exchange gifts, the other wives and daughters of Savannah society presented elaborate offerings: designer handbags, spa weekend packages, jewelry that could have fed a family for months. I watched Victoria Ashford Daniels' ex-girlfriend, whom his parents still adored, present the bride with a Chanel bag, the very one the bride had been coveting. The squeals of delight felt like needles in my skin. When my turn came, I handed over my carefully wrapped boxes with hands that didn't shake, though my pride screamed inside me. "Oh, how practical," the bride said, holding up one of the bracelets. "And look, they're actually silver. Real silver. That's so thoughtful within your budget. Rachel." The room went quiet the way it does when someone accidentally says what everyone's thinking. I saw Elaine's slight smile, Victoria's barely concealed smirk, and Daniel's cousin trying to look sympathetic while obviously agreeing. "I'm glad you like them," I said, my voice steady as granite. Inside, I was calculating, the way my father taught me, assets and liabilities, debts and leverage. The Whitmore empire looked solid from the outside, but I'd done my research. They were leveraged to the hilt, multiple properties mortgaged to fund new developments, everything built on a house of cards that required perfect balance. Conversations had a way of dying whenever I entered a room during the wedding preparations. I'd walk into the living room where Elaine and her friends were discussing arrangements, and suddenly they'd need more tea. I'd join Daniel and his father in the study, and Charles would remember urgent calls he needed to make. "Am I that unwelcome?" I asked Daniel one night, after his mother had literally turned her back on me at the rehearsal dinner planning meeting. "You're imagining things," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Mother's just stressed about the wedding. You know how she is about everything being perfect." "Perfect meaning without me." He sighed, that particular sigh that suggested I was being dramatic. "Rachel, please, not everything is about you. Can't you just try to get along for me? Always for him, never for us." I continued my silent preparations. Through my shell companies, anonymous LLCs registered in Delaware, I began buying small portions of debt from the banks that held Whitmore Real Estate's loans. Never enough to trigger notice, just steady accumulation, like drops of water that would eventually become a flood. The dress fitting was another exercise in humiliation. Elaine had chosen my wedding dress, a gift from the family, without consulting me. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely wrong for my body type. During alterations, she stood there with the seamstress discussing how to minimize my problem areas, as if I weren't standing right there. "Perhaps if we add more structure here," she suggested, gesturing at my chest, "and take it out here," gesturing at my hips. "We want her to look appropriate for the photographs." "I think I look fine," I said. "Of course you do, dear," Elaine replied. "But fine isn't good enough for a Whitmore wedding. We have standards to maintain. The entire social register will be there." That night, I went home and pulled up the Whitmore real estate holdings on my computer. $70 million in assets, $48 million in debt, cash flow dependent on 3 major development projects, all of which required perfect execution and timing. One stumble, one recalled loan, and the whole thing would collapse. I made another purchase through my holding company, another $1 million in debt acquired, another piece of the foundation slipping into my control. Daniel found me at my computer at 2:15 "Can't sleep?" he asked, kissing the top of my head. "Just thinking about the wedding," I said, closing the laptop. "Mother means well," he said for the 1,000th time. "Once we're married, once you give her grandchildren, everything will be different. You'll see. You'll be truly part of the family then." I looked up at him, searching his face. What if I'm never good enough for them? Daniel, what if nothing I do ever makes me acceptable? "Don't be ridiculous," he said, already heading back to bed. "You're overthinking everything, as usual." As usual, like my feelings were a character flaw to be tolerated rather than validated. I sat there in the dark, listening to his footsteps fade, and made another purchase. $5 million more in Whitmore debt. My father's voice whispered in my memory, "The best revenge isn't served cold, Rachel. It's served at exactly the right temperature, at exactly the right moment, when they're holding all the wrong cards and you're holding the deed to the table." I was almost holding the deed to their entire world, and they were too busy looking down on me to notice. The Whitmore-Harrison wedding was the social event of the season. The Forsyth Hotel had been transformed into something from a European fairy tale, imported roses climbing every column, crystal dripping from every surface, and enough champagne to float a yacht. The media was there, of course. Southern Living, Garden and Gun, the society pages of every paper from Atlanta to Charleston. I stood in the bridal suite at 4:30 p.m., wearing the simple navy dress Daniel had approved. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what they wanted: unremarkable, appropriate, invisible. The bride, Daniel's cousin Margaret, floated past in $10,000 worth of French lace, and I felt nothing, no envy, no sadness, just a cold clarity that had been building for months. "Rachel, darling." Elaine swept in, resplendent in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. "How practical of you to wear something you can use again. Though perhaps next time, something with a bit more effort. We do have photographers here." "I thought it best not to draw attention from the bride," I replied. As if that were possible. Victoria Ashford laughed, entering behind Elaine in a stunning emerald dress that made everyone else look drab. She'd been included in the wedding party, of course. The Whitmore's preferred daughter-in-law, the one that got away. The ceremony was beautiful, I suppose. I sat in the third-row family, but not immediate family, while Daniel stood as a groomsman. Charles gave a reading about prosperity and legacy, his voice booming through the cathedral like he was closing a business deal. I thought about the 3 development projects he had pending, all requiring perfect timing, all built on loans I now controlled 70% of through my shell companies. The reception began at 7 p.m. in the grand ballroom. Our table was strategically placed visible enough to show I was included, far enough from the main table to signal my rank. Daniel was seated with the wedding party, occasionally catching my eye and smiling apologetically. Always apologetic, never actually doing anything about it. By 9:45 p.m., the champagne had loosened tongues and masks were slipping. I stood with Charles's circle of business associates, half listening to them discuss their latest ventures. Gregory Hammond, deep into his bourbon, started reminiscing about Daniel's bachelor days. "We all thought he'd marry the Ashford girl," Gregory slurred, gesturing toward Victoria on the dance floor. "Same background, same values, made sense, you know. But then he brings home—" He gestured at me. "This." "Gregory," Charles warned half-heartedly. "What I'm just saying what everyone thinks? No offense, Rachel, but you're not exactly Whitmore material. Are you, Cleveland computer programming? It's like Daniel picked someone from a completely different species." The group chuckled uncomfortably. I set down my champagne glass carefully. "You're right, Gregory. I'm not Whitmore material. I actually work for my money instead of inheriting it or marrying into it." The laughter stopped. Charles's face darkened. "Watch your tone, young lady." "Or what?" I asked, my voice calm but clear. "You'll continue treating me like an unwelcome guest at my own family events. You'll keep making jokes about my background while taking credit for successes you bought instead of built." "You ungrateful little nobody!" Charles stepped closer, his voice rising. "We welcomed you into this family despite your complete lack of breeding, connections, or contribution. Daniel could have had anyone, and he chose you out of some misguided charity. And this is how you repay our tolerance." "Tolerance." I laughed, actually laughed. "Is that what you call 3 years of constant humiliation? 3 years of being treated like the help? 3 years of—" The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. Charles's hand connected with my cheek with enough force to snap my head sideways. His wedding ring caught my cheekbone, and I felt the skin split. The champagne glass I'd been holding fell, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bells. The entire ballroom went silent. The band stopped mid-song. 200 guests turned to stare. I touched my cheek, and my fingers came away red with blood. "Charles." Someone gasped, maybe Margaret's mother. I stood there, my cheek burning, blood trickling down my jaw, and looked across the room at Daniel. He'd risen from his seat at the head table, his face pale with shock. Our eyes met across the space of that glittering ballroom, and I saw him make a choice. He walked over slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He reached us, looked at his father's furious face, at my bloodied cheek, at the shattered glass at our feet. Then he leaned in close to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, and whispered, "Just let it go. Rachel, not here. Not tonight. Just let it go." His father had struck me in front of everyone we knew, and his response was to tell me to let it go. I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face, the weak chin I'd once thought was gentle, the soft eyes I'd mistaken for kind. "You're right," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I should let it go. Let go of the delusion that you were ever man enough to deserve me." I picked up my clutch from the table, noting with satisfaction how steady my hands were. The crowd parted as I walked through the ballroom, my heels clicking against marble in perfect rhythm. Behind me, Charles's voice boomed. "Well, that's what happens when you marry outside your class. Trash always shows itself eventually." And Daniel, my husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, said nothing. The last thing I heard before the ballroom doors closed was Elaine's voice, weary and dismissive. "Well, we all knew this would happen eventually. Daniel, darling, Victoria's here alone tonight." I walked through the lobby, past the doorman who tried not to stare at the blood on my face, and out into the humid Savannah night. The valet brought my car, carefully not asking if I was all right. As I drove away from the Forsyth Hotel, away from the Whitmores, away from my marriage, I wasn't crying. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the Bohemian Hotel on River Street, checking in under my maiden name at 10:47 p.m. The desk clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, took one look at my face and quietly upgraded me to a suite without asking questions. In the elevator, I caught my reflection. Blood had dried on my cheek. My carefully styled hair was disheveled, but my eyes were clear, clearer than they'd been in 3 years. The suite overlooked the Savannah River, lights from the cargo ships twinkling like fallen stars on the black water. I cleaned the cut on my cheek, changed into the hotel robe, and poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar. Then I made the call I'd been preparing for. "Marcus, it's Rachel Monroe." I used my maiden name deliberately. "I need you to execute the Whitmore portfolio. Everything we discussed." Marcus Hale, my attorney, didn't miss a beat despite it being nearly midnight on a Saturday. "Are you certain once we trigger this, there's no going back?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "The papers will be filed at 9 a.m. Monday morning. The loans will be called immediately after. By noon, Whitmore Real Estate will be in free fall." "Perfect," I said, watching a tugboat push a container ship upriver. "And Marcus, make sure the notices are delivered to Charles's office during his Monday partners' meeting. He likes an audience for his victories. He should have one for his defeat." After ending the call, I opened my laptop and reviewed everything one last time. Through my shell companies, Midwest Holdings, Cleveland Ventures, Monroe Investment Group, and a dozen others, I now controlled 78% of Whitmore Real Estate's debt, $41 million in loans that Charles had taken against his properties, all with acceleration clauses that could be triggered by the debt holder. Every loan officer had been happy to sell the debt to my companies at 95 cents on the dollar, a small discount for immediate cash. They thought? They had no idea they were handing me a loaded weapon. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the hotel. Daniel calling, texting, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. I listened to one. "Rachel, where are you? This is insane. You can't just leave like this. Dad was drunk. He didn't mean it. You know how he gets. Just come home and we'll talk about this. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. His father had assaulted me in public, and Daniel thought I was the one making it big. I deleted all the messages without reading or listening to the rest. At 2:15 a.m., I sat on the balcony with my laptop, champagne from room service, and the river breeze carrying the scent of salt and history. I pulled up the Whitmore Real Estate website, looking at their portfolio one last time. The Riverside Development, $15 million in debt. The Historic District Project, $12 million. The Tybee Island Resort Plan, $14 million. All leveraged against each other, all requiring perfect execution to stay afloat. By Monday afternoon, I would own it all. I thought about calling Daniel back, giving him one last chance to make this right. But then I remembered him standing there in that ballroom, seeing my blood, seeing his father's violence, and choosing to whisper, "Let it go," instead of defending me. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some silences say more than words ever could. The next morning, Sunday, I woke at 7 a.m. to sunlight streaming through the windows and my phone battery dead from the constant calls. I ordered breakfast, had a long bath, and for the first time in 3 years, felt like I could breathe fully. The cut on my cheek had scabbed over, and the bruise was starting to bloom purple and yellow evidence of what the Whitmores really were beneath their sterling silver facade. I spent the day walking through Savannah's squares, thinking about my father. He'd died when I was 15, but not before teaching me everything about strength, dignity, and the long game. "Never let them see you coming, Rachel," he'd said during one of our chess games. "Let them underestimate you. Let them think they've won. Then take everything while they're celebrating." At 4 p.m., I sat in Forsyth Park, watching families play, when an older woman sat beside me on the bench. She looked at my face, at the obvious bruise and cut, and said quietly, "Whoever did that to you, honey, I hope you're pressing charges." "I'm doing something better," I replied. "I'm taking everything." She smiled, a fierce, knowing smile. "Good for you, dear. Good for you." That evening, I had dinner sent to my room and watched the sun set over the river. Tomorrow would begin the dismantling of the Whitmore empire. Every property would be called, every loan accelerated, every asset frozen. Charles would wake up rich and go to bed ruined. Elaine would watch her social status crumble as the banks came calling. And Daniel would finally understand that choosing his family's cruelty over his wife's dignity came with a price. I raised my champagne glass to the darkening sky. "Here's to letting go," I said to no one and everyone. Here's to letting go of everything, including mercy. At 11:59 p.m., I sent a single text to Daniel. "You told me to let it go. Tomorrow. You'll understand that I did. I let go of you, your family, and any hesitation about what comes next. Thank Marcus Hale for the paperwork." Then I turned off my phone, climbed into the luxurious hotel bed, and slept better than I had in years. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you assume someone's silence means they're powerless. Tomorrow, they would learn that I'd been playing chess while they were playing checkers, and I'd just said, "Checkmate." Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes Savannah look like a painting. I was sitting on my hotel balcony at 8:45 a.m., coffee in hand, when my phone turned back on for the occasion, began its symphony. Marcus Hale texted at 9:02 a.m., "Documents filed, notices being delivered now." The first call came at 9:18 a.m. "Daniel," his voice pitched high with panic. "Rachel, what have you done? Dad's assistant just ran into his meeting with papers, something about loans being called. This has to be a mistake." I didn't answer. I sipped my coffee and watched a container ship navigate the river below. By 9:30 a.m., the calls were coming every 30 seconds. Daniel, Charles, Elaine, even Victoria Ashford, probably calling to gloat or gather intelligence. I let them all go to voicemail while I pulled up my laptop to watch the destruction unfold in real time. The first news alert hit at 10:15 a.m. Whitmore Real Estate faces sudden loan crisis. By 11 a.m., it was on every Savannah business blog. Multiple creditors call loans on Whitmore Empire simultaneously. Charles's voicemail at 11:23 a.m. was a masterpiece of rage. "You little bitch, I don't know how you did this, but I will destroy you. You think you've won something, I'll sue you into oblivion. You'll be living in a cardboard box when I'm done with you." Empty threats from a man watching his kingdom burn. He had no idea that I controlled the shell companies calling his loans. No idea that his threats were being made to his largest creditor. By noon, the Riverside Development Project had been frozen, construction halted by court order. The historic district conversion was in emergency negotiations with banks. The Tybee Island resort, Charles's pride and joy. His legacy project was being prepared for auction. Elaine's voicemail at 12:45 p.m. was different, desperate. Rachel, please. Whatever Charles did, this isn't the answer. You're destroying everything we've built. Generations of work. Please, just call me back. We can work this out. Generations of work built on looking down on people like me. Generations of arrogance and cruelty disguised as breeding and class. Let it all burn. The Savannah Society blogs were having a field day by 2 p.m. Whitmore Empire crumbles in single morning. Society dynasty faces financial ruin. Questions arise about Whitmore solvency. The comments sections were brutal, apparently. The Whitmores had made more enemies than friends over the years. Daniel arrived at my hotel at 3:30 p.m. The desk called up, and I had them send him away. He texted frantically, "I'm not leaving until you talk to me. This is insane. You're destroying my family over one mistake." One mistake. That's what he called years of degradation capped with physical assault. By 4 p.m., Charles's personal assets were being frozen. The country club had already called about unpaid dues. The marina wanted to know when he'd be moving his yacht. The vultures were circling, and they were hungry. Marcus called at 5:15 p.m. with an update. The Whitmore's attorney has been trying to negotiate all day. They're looking for the identity of the shell company owners. They have no idea it's you. They're offering 15 cents on the dollar to maintain control. Decline everything, I said. I want it all. The local news picked up the story for the 6 p.m. broadcast. I watched from my hotel room as the reporter stood outside Whitmore Real Estate's offices. In a shocking turn of events, one of Savannah's oldest real estate dynasties faces complete collapse after multiple creditors simultaneously called in loans worth over $40 million. Charles Whitmore was unavailable for comment, but sources inside the company described the situation as catastrophic. Victoria Ashford called again at 7:20 p.m. This time, I answered. "My God, Rachel," she said without preamble. "Did you really do this?" "I don't know what you're talking about." She laughed, sharp and knowing. "I always thought you were smarter than they gave you credit for. But this is biblical. You know Elaine called me crying, Elaine Whitmore. Crying. Said they might lose the house." "How unfortunate," I said flatly. "Charles hit you at the wedding. Everyone's talking about it. Margaret's mother said there was blood." "There was," and Daniel just let it happen. "He told me to let it go." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know, I dodged a bullet when Daniel chose you over me. I thought I'd lost something precious. Turns out I escaped a family of cowards and bullies. Good for you, Rachel. Whatever you did, however you did it, good for you." By 8 p.m., Whitmore collapse was trending on Savannah Twitter. Someone had posted a photo from the wedding the moment after the slap. My hand to my bloodied cheek. Daniel standing uselessly beside his father. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. Charles's second voicemail, left at 9:43 p.m., was different. The rage had given way to something else, fear. "Rachel, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Whatever you think happened, we can discuss this like civilized people. Call me back. Please. Please." The first time Charles Whitmore had ever said please to me. Daniel's final text of the night came at 11:17 p.m. "I know you're behind this. I don't know how, but I know. You've destroyed everything. My family, my future, my inheritance. All because you couldn't just fit in, couldn't just try harder. I hope you're satisfied." I was completely, utterly satisfied. I poured myself a final glass of champagne and stood on the balcony, looking out at the Savannah night. Somewhere across the city, the Whitmores were scrambling, calling in favors that no longer existed, trying to save an empire built on borrowed money and borrowed time. By tomorrow, the banks would start the foreclosure proceedings. By the end of the week, everything with the Whitmore name would be for sale. And I would be the buyer, hidden behind my shell companies, purchasing their legacy for pennies on the dollar, just like Charles had done to so many families before, except this time, the family losing everything had thought they were untouchable. "Never show all your cards until the table is full," I whispered to the night air, raising my glass to my father's memory. "And when you do, make sure you own the casino." The Whitmore empire hadn't just collapsed. It had been methodically, carefully, lovingly demolished, and they still had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed as nobody held the detonator. 3 days later, I agreed to meet Daniel at a coffee shop on Bull Street, neutral territory. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 72 hours unshaven, red-eyed, his usually perfect hair unkempt. The confident Whitmore air had been replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger. "Rachel," he started, then stopped, seemingly unable to find words. I waited, sipping my cappuccino, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "Why," he finally asked, "how could you do this to us?" I set down my cup carefully. "I have one question for you, Daniel. Just one. When your father hit me, when I stood there bleeding in front of everyone we knew, why didn't you stand up for me?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. The silence stretched between us like a gulf. Finally, he mumbled, "It was complicated. He's my father. You don't understand how these families work." "You're right," I interrupted. "I don't understand how a man can watch his wife be assaulted and choose his attacker over her. I don't understand that kind of cowardice." "Cowardice." His voice rose. "I was trying to keep the peace." "You were trying to keep your inheritance," I corrected. "And now you have neither peace nor inheritance." Before he could respond, the coffee shop door chimed. Charles and Elaine Whitmore entered like thunderclouds, dressed in their finest as if armor could protect them from reality. Charles's face was purple with rage. Elaine's makeup couldn't hide the stress lines that had appeared overnight. "You," Charles pointed at me, his finger shaking. "You did this. Somehow, you're behind this." I smiled, taking another sip of coffee. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," Elaine hissed. "The timing is too perfect. The wedding, then this. You vindictive little—" "Careful," I warned, my voice sharp. "Slander is still illegal, even when you're bankrupt." Charles slammed his hand on the table. "Who are you? Really some corporate spy? Did our competitors send you—" I laughed, genuine and delighted. "Oh, Charles, even now, you can't accept the truth. I'm exactly who I've always been, Rachel Monroe, the nobody from Cleveland you all despised. The difference is, I was never actually a nobody. I was just quiet." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned it toward them. The balance showed numbers that made Elaine gasp $87 million. I sold my first patent 6 months before I met Daniel. I said conversationally, $68 million. I've made another 19 million since. I never needed your money, your connections, or your approval. I wanted love. I got contempt, condescension, and finally, assault. Charles's face went from purple to white. "The shell companies, Monroe Investment Group. It was you. Every loan, every debt, every mortgage," I confirmed. "I own it all now. Or I will, once the foreclosure's complete. Your house, your office building, even that ghastly country club membership you're so proud of, all mine." "We'll sue," Charles sputtered. "This is illegal. It's business." I cut him off. "Isn't that what you always said? Business is business. Sentiment doesn't pay dividends. I learned from the best, Charles." Elaine started crying, actual tears smearing her mascara. "Rachel, please. We're sorry. We were wrong. We'll do anything." "Actually, there is one thing," I said. Standing up, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "Divorce papers. Daniel. Sign them. And I'll let you keep the beach house, the small one, in Tybee. It's worth about $400,000, enough to start over, if you're not too proud to work." Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the papers. "That's it after everything." "That's more than you gave me when I needed you," I replied. "Sign or get nothing." He signed, his signature barely legible. I looked at the three of them, this family that had made me feel so small, so worthless, so unwelcome. They looked smaller now, diminished, ordinary. You know what the ironic part is. If you'd just been kind, just treated me with basic human decency, I would have used my money to help your business. I would have been the best thing that ever happened to the Whitmore empire. Instead, you made me your enemy." Charles stood up, his fists clenched. "You think you've won! You think destroying us makes you better!" "No," I said, heading for the door. "But it makes us even. You tried to destroy my spirit every single day for 3 years. The difference is, I succeeded." I paused at the door, looking back one last time. Oh, and Charles, that slap you gave me, the one Daniel told me to let go. I did let it go. I let go of mercy, sympathy, and any hesitation about ruining you completely. So really, I did exactly what your son suggested. I walked out into the Savannah morning, breathing in the honeysuckle-scented air. My phone buzzed, Marcus, confirming the foreclosure auction dates. The Riverside development would be mine by month's end. I'd already had plans drawn up to convert it into affordable housing for working families. The Historic District project would become a tech incubator for young entrepreneurs. The Whitmore name would be erased, replaced with something better opportunity for people like me, people they'd dismissed as beneath them. My father had been right all along. The best revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about becoming everything they said you couldn't be, taking everything they said you didn't deserve, and then using it to build something they could never understand, a legacy based on merit, not birthright. As I walked through Forsyth Park, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Monroe, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We're doing a story on the Whitmore collapse and your remarkable business acquisitions. Would you care to comment?" I smiled, watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze. "No comment, Ms. Walsh. But if you're looking for a story, you might want to investigate the new affordable housing project coming to Riverside. I hear it's going to change everything." The Whitmores thought they were Savannah royalty, untouchable and eternal. They forgot that every dynasty falls eventually. They just never imagined it would be the peasant they'd dismissed who would hold the sword. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope Rachel's journey resonated with you in some way. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from viewers all around the world. Drop a comment below and let me know your location so we can connect. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share your thoughts about Rachel's revenge. Was she justified? What would you have done in her situation? Your comments mean everything to me, and I read every single one. Until next time, remember, never let anyone make you feel small, because you never know who's quietly holding all the cards.